I'm wearing a hat. Today we're going to be talking about types of reverb. Now, first we should understand what reverb is, and it's most easily understood by looking at the first type of reverb, acoustic reverb. So reverb refers to, in this case, how sound bounces around a room. And all other types of reverb are trying to emulate this phenomena, so we refer to them as reverb as well. So the way sound bounces in a room is reverb. And there are a series of reflections that can be broken down into three main chunks, main categories. We have direct sound. So if I'm sitting in an audience and there's a violin player and they play a sound, whoop, there's going to be sound. So let's just say there's a violin player. This sound is going to go in all directions down. It's going to form I picture like bubbles of sound coming off this, waves of sound. And we've learned about this in Sound and Synth Basics, and we also cover some of these things in Critical Listening, the Critical Listening series. So we have these waves of sound, boom, and part of this wave of sound is going to pass through some air, but it's going to hit me without interacting with any other surfaces or objects or whatever besides the air in the room. And this is going to be referred to as direct sound. It's direct. It comes straight to me. So this is the first sound I also hear. So the first sound that hits me, bang, bang, that's some direct sound. Then we have what's called first order reflections or early reflection points. This is the parts of the waves that have to bounce off of one surface, and then it's heard by me. Thus, first order reflections. So they hit me one surface. Then you have second order, third order, fourth order, la la la. It gets, and then we can get into acoustics and get a little dense, but it bounces off of a bunch more surfaces, and after some amount of surfaces, they hit me. So the direct sound is the most clear. Then you have these early reflections, and these are really important for the timbre of the reverb. And then you have just a barrage of just tons and tons of reflections because it's bounced off of so many surfaces now. And we perceive that as reverb because there's no way for us to tell where these things are coming from. So direct sound is obviously our biggest clue based on also the reverb where a sound is in a room. And there are various ways we can accomplish this phenomenon. Something I should note, and that we do cover a little bit in the Critical Listening series, is that there are basic acoustic properties that contribute to a reverb. So, for example, especially acoustic reverb. That is that there are sounds, when it bounces off, say, this computer screen, it will absorb. There's an absorption coefficient associated with this. So it'll absorb some sound, it'll reflect some sound, and some sound, lower frequencies, will just diffract around it. They'll literally just bend around it as if the thing wasn't there at all. And so these basic properties can change based on the substances that they're hitting. And so when we tune a room, we want to be careful about the materials we use to build the room and all these different things. But I'm just pointing out that in a reverb context, that's what contributes to a room sounding the way that it does, all these different things. So that's like reverb in a nutshell, acoustic reverb. And the way we would capture this is we'd simply put a mic. Now, as soon as we toss the mic up, we get into the conversation of mic and where you place the mic and all these different things. A basic room mic its job is to capture the sound of the room, and then you mix that in. So you would get acoustic reverb. And you'll see this sometimes when you're mixing with tracks. You'll have some tracks. If you recorded the session, you'll probably do this on purpose. Well, I challenge you to do it not on purpose. You have to put a mic up. So, but they're tracks that are specifically there to just add reverb to the room. And depending on where you place them, you will get different sounds. So that's acoustic reverb. Then you have what's called algorithmic reverb. Algorithmic reverb is a math equation that tries to simulate this circumstance. And, well, I'm jumping into digital. I guess we should jump back to analog real quick. So before digital came along, we had all these awesome tools. We had analog reverb. Analog reverb is spring reverb and plate reverb. So we would literally get a metal spring and run our signal through this metal spring. We'd actually get a couple. And the metal spring would vibrate in such a way as to create a reverb-like effect. It will never actually sound like an acoustic room because you're running it through a metal spring, but it has a particular sonic quality to it. It's very common, like guitar amps will have it. So it's sort of associated with the guitar to an extent, but you don't have to use it on just the guitar. So that's spring reverb, and you send it through, and the spring will vibrate in such a way when it's introduced to the signal you're sending through it that it will generate a reverb-like texture. The next one is we have plate reverb. Now, instead of it being a spring, because the spring is sort of like a line, right? I mean, we could mess with the thickness of the spring, but we have this line, and we'll do it through a couple, and them coming together will form the spring. Well, a plate's got width and length, right? And you could affect the thickness as well. And there's all these different things about good sounding plates and not so great sounding plates. But they're very rare these days. And you're going to probably be using some variation on plugins. And I don't have a plate reverb to show you one. So sorry. And they're very expensive. So basically, a plate reverb can vibrate in 2 dimensions, and so it will also have its own particular sonic quality to them. And so, so those are the analog ones. And then we move over into digital, which is now we have algorithmic reverb. Algorithmic reverb is reverb that is specific. What it tries to do is you write a math equation that will take input and it will spit out a reverb. And it will manipulate the data in such a way as to try and simulate early reflections, late reflections. If we open up, I have here a couple examples of these. So I have first up, I have a Fruity Reverb 2. It's just a simple algorithmic. They actually let you do mid-side processing, which is pretty cool. We're not going to pay attention to that right now. So we have various settings, and various reverbs will give you different amounts of settings, and the way they write their equation, because maybe it's a dynamically written equation. So if certain signal reaches, it does this. But if it's different, let's say that like a signal above such and such a level and with a particular harmonic series, then we'll affect it differently. So you can get some really complicated reverb plugs. Most of them, as far as I'm aware, they do just pretty simple equations. Now, don't ask me what the equations are. I've never like made a reverb. I just know that these are algorithmic reverbs. They use an equation. So we have this setting. In this case, we can affect the early reflection points here and how loud they are. We have a dry wet, so we can mix them in. And we also have a wet setting, so we can affect how wet the sound is. These are basically the late reflection points, the ones that come from everywhere. And then we can also filter our reverb, so that's kind of a nifty extra feature, so we can sort of shape our sound. We have control over the diffusion. This will affect our early reflection points quite dramatically. Now, diffusion, if you've ever seen a diffuser in a room, you probably have. They're usually made of wood. They could be made of other things. There's new phase grading diffusers as well, which are kind of cool. They're really weird. They supposedly can diffuse all the way down to 20 hertz. And so I kind of want to hear one. I've never actually heard one. But basically a diffuser, you put these things on your walls and their job is to spread the sound out in a room. That's what a diffuser does. And so we can actually affect this, and we're basically affecting just the early reflection points. Very diffused room is obviously going to spread the sound around very evenly. And then we have our size, which is how big. And so this gets to our delay setting. So we have a delay. Now you might be saying a delay setting, what's that all about? Well, in a very big room, we will experience a delay, right? Because we will say our thing, and then the sound's going to go way over there. But it's not just the simple echo, because sure, we'll get some that comes right back. Maybe we'll have a little bit of what's referred to as slapback, but we'll also get a whole bunch of interaction over there. And then that's eventually going to reach us as well. It's not just going to bounce once and come back. It's not that simple. It's freaking real life, man. So it's going to bounce around a ton over there. And so we'll create a pre-delay to try and simulate that. And that will make rooms sound very big. So sometimes you can go with a much smaller, a little more tight reverb. And just by adding a slight delay, you can make it sound bigger. Then we also we can affect we can affect crossovers, I believe. Yeah, crossovers. Dampening. So air naturally absorbs high frequencies. And so when I'm not going to cover the whole thing. I kind of already have to an extent. But we have dampening. So this is another common thing you'll see on reverbs. Reverbs will have this setting to account for air. So air will absorb higher frequencies. And so this will basically simulate that. So our reverb will dampen the higher ones. It'll make an EQ cut, basically. And so this is an algorithmic reverb, and obviously you can have different ones. And then we also have the RC48. What's nifty about this guy, it's made by Native Instruments, modeled by Softtube, or it's made by Softtube, sold by Native Instruments, something like that. Softtube made it. See, there's their logo right there. But Native Instruments is on there too, some sort of collab. And you see here that we have the ability to shape the pre-delay, which is that delay I was talking about, the delay before it comes in. We have some abilities to do the high, mid, high cut, all those sorts of things, or dampening. You see we have a knob for that. And this is a little bit different because dampening in this context, I haven't read the manual, but I'm just going to say or guess that it's affecting the reverb as it goes on, right? Because the longer the sound is there, the more it'll be dampened. And so I'm guessing that this was what that controls versus a high cut will just make a straight cut to the entire reverb signal all the time. And so you see when you can pull up different reverbs in, they're very similar controls. You have some pre-echoes and some other really nifty things that we can mess with in here if you have this plug. But one thing that's really cool is they have these different timbres you can select, right? And it actually shows you the response of the room. So you see this room's very even across a lot of the frequencies versus let's go to and small rooms don't happen for that long. Let's go to an echo gate, and you see that, there's some sort of initial reverb, and then there's a break, and then there's more reverb, and you see the high frequencies get let through a lot longer than the low ones do. And so you can go ahead and we could shape similar things in the Fruity Reverb too. This is kind of nice because it also has a very visual feedback and you can actually see the display move. And then this last one here is the Fruity Convolver. And this is Convolution Reverb. So we have Algorithmic Reverb and then we have Convolution Reverb. And Convolution Reverb, the way it works is you have some set of samples and you have some input. Usually this sample, its goal is to capture the sound of a room. So not all convolution engines are convolution reverb engines because of the amount of samples they support, and a couple other things. I don't totally understand the complete differences. But basically, you have a set of samples from a room. So you'll like take a gunshot in a room, and then it will take the gunshot that because that gunshot's so transient, you're taking the reverb tail from that gunshot and you're applying it to this signal, and it puts this, it's like in a weird way, it's integrated into the signal. There's like, you can go look up, there's a great book, the DSP, the Scientist's Guide to DSP or something like that. It's free, it's online. It explains this really well. And it combines them in such a way that that reverb is imprinted, that sonic character that the gun took on from that space has now been imprinted on your signal, and you've now got that space on that signal. You've essentially taken the space and put it on the signal. So hopefully that made sense. So that's what convolution reverb. So you can actually drop anything into here and do the same thing. It's used for modeling and distortion as well, which we talked about a little bit earlier. So that's convolution reverb, and there's a couple other diddle daddles I'm sure that go on during the process. And Contact has a convolution engine, super good. So you just have a lot of options. So let's go ahead and just take a listen. I don't have any Springer plate examples. Sorry about that. But I mean, if you've heard a guitar been played through an amp, you can certainly do that. Oh, you know what? There's probably one in Guitar Rig. Anyways, I'm not going to deal with that right now. And there are sonic characteristics of these different qualities, because like a plate and a spring have like their iconic sound versus like an acoustic room versus, you know, this, they're all going to sound different. So just work with what you have, learn the sounds you can get out of it, and maybe look at expanding and getting a couple other plugs. The ones I go to the most by far are this guy, and then I go to the RC48. There's another one called the RC24, but I don't mess with that one nearly as much. I could grab it and use it more. I probably should. So I'll grab things sometimes just to differ it up. But I have another thing we need to talk about here is the fact that reverbs sound very different based on material. So here, let's go ahead and high cut some of this and low cut just the bottom end out. You see even the picture kind of changes too, so the color is kind of nice. So I use this one a lot. I'm going to leave the delay where it's at, this decay. The decay is pretty long already. This has you can get a very long decay out of this. Good for impact sounds. But here we have a hi-hat, and with this Fruity Reverb on it, here's it dry. So very short sound. Here it is through the Fruity Reverb. Oh, and I'll set the dry to normal. That's something else we'll talk about too, is the idea of sends. You should really have sends for reverbs. So, okay, that makes sense. Cool. So we've added the reverb. You can hear it. Let's check out a low diffused reverb, low diffusion. And so if you get this going, let's take down the size. I mean, it's kind of weird, but this is Flutter Echo, and you'll have different degrees of this. So that's what Flutter Echo sounds like. So if you go in a room and you clap and you hear some element of this in the sound, that is referred to as flutter, and it's undesirable. You don't want that. But if we do the same thing but just increase the diffusion, you can hear how different that sounds. You even hear you have a little bit of, sounds like some phasing and stuff going on as well. And so we could do a pre-delay. And so this is, again, timing could be important on this. You might not want a super long pre-delay. And really small delays, you'd be surprised. You can't technically perceive these, but they change the feel of the sound. You need to go over 20 milliseconds to really hear an actual delay. So you can hear a delay on that one. And then we can affect various things here. Let's go ahead and look at the sound of the RC48. And so I just go through, here's the echo gate. So that's an interesting one. I quite like the ambience, the classic spaces one. So now this is set up as a send right now. So let's put it on a mix and put it at 50-50 for now. And then we have a short room. You can tell the room has changed. and you can hear the lower stuff coming through. So hearing what your reverb sounds like can be really important too. And there's actually certain styles of mix moves that are characteristic to certain studios. And those are those, when you're mixing, you may choose to do one of those. They're just moves that work out commonly. They're common moves that work out really well. Okay, so now let's go back to this one real quick, and let's listen to it versus, I have a string section over here. I'm going to detach this. I'm so tired of doing that. Okay, so let's listen to the strings. Oh, my strings are still loading up. Okay, cool. Now, you already hear there's some reverb on there. Let's get rid of that reverb. So they have their own reverb on their deal. And that is right here. And effects, reverb. Actually, we just turn it off. Bam, solved. Right, versus this. So here's what the reverb sounds like on a hat. Now this string. So it's hardly noticeable why a longer tone is playing. That's something you got to really keep in mind while you're doing this. If we do a longer decay, let's do something ridiculous, like 6 seconds. Check this out. Right? This is a very bright reverb, and let's try the same thing on the strings here. Let's just like loop it once or twice. So you see it contributes very differently, and you could create big walls and textures of space using this, but you want to be careful because this can eat up room in your mix. So we may consider going with a shorter reverb, or even a delay, especially if we're doing something like this. We can achieve very different senses of space with a delay. Let's go ahead and look at the RC48. Let's compare that one. So here we have an RC48, and is another algorithmic reverb versus so you see this is like you almost can't even hear a difference almost. And then let's go over and check out the convolution reverb. So right now, I don't know what kind of thing I have in here. Let's just listen to it. So we're running it through some sort of sounds like we're in like an underground garage or something. Let's listen to it over the strings. And you see this reverb is bringing out the low end in our strings. It's not, the high end is relatively untouched. That's kind of an interesting thing to note. So anyways, that's some deals about reverb. We're going to be looking at reverb a bit more as we go. It's very handy. Oh, sends. Let's talk about this. Reverb is often the most intensive process you have going on, like one of the most intensive ones, because it's got to do all this processing to do all this, right? And depending on how sophisticated your reverb plugin is. So what I do is I set up sends. And if you're, a lot of people when they're new, use them as inserts. I use them as inserts sometimes, it depends on the reason why I'm bringing it up. But there's very few reasons why you wouldn't use it as a send. A lot of times it's convenience, or I'm too lazy to set up another send. So I have a couple sends here. One's a reverb and delay, and one's just a verb send. I probably should set up 2 more verb sends because I'm constantly making them anyways. Well, I just put them on my my track. So what you do though is you only have one, so you can send all your stuff to one verb. And that way you save yourself a lot of processing. And there's various other reasons why you do this. Like a studio might only have one verb. Like that's it. If you're going analog. So you would have to send it. You'd use send. So you'd actually send it. So here you would actually turn the dry off. And so it's on wet right now, as you can see. And so it's all process signal only. And then you just mix it into taste, which is another thing that when you put a reverb on, you may not mix it into taste when you put it on like this. You'll just go ahead and mix, you'll leave it there and you'll adjust the settings to something you like, but it's often way more wet than it needs to be to get the sense of space that you want, and it clutters your mix. So maybe this is usually just better out from just a perspective as well, because you'll keep yourself from doing like overly reverbed sounds. Another thing is I had an instructor get up once and just challenge us to give him a reason why a verb send is not better. And we went through this whole thing, and I didn't say anything, but the only reason I could really think of was if you're using it creatively in a process that absolutely requires that reverb is there. And I do that quite a bit, actually. So for example, sometimes, and also some reverbs are less intensive than others. So like, for example, if I'm doing a reverb in Harmor, I don't exactly have an option to use it as a verb send. So I just kind of use the verb in Harmor, and I don't have any CPU problems usually. It used to be a bigger issue. But the other reason is, let's say that this reverb is hitting a compressor and it's got to be right there. Like, I don't want to set up another best with another compressor because I'm using it on this one sound and then I distort it. And the reverb is really important in this process. Then having the reverb in that spot's good. But you do want to get in the habit of using sends. Like, sends are just a bajillion times better when mixing. So that's mostly sound design reasons too. That's another reason why I didn't speak up. That's sound design. It's not really a mixing reason. So having a couple sends every now and then, I just slap one on there just because it's convenient. And I can have a bunch of different reverbs that are unique to their spaces, but oftentimes I can also create just way more mud. And so it's just handy to have like maybe 2 or 3 reverbs that you're going to use. And then anyways, I've explained most of my arguments about this thing. It's not like a super big deal, but it is something that like you'll find yourself. It's also super handy just to have one already set up, and you can pick a sound that you generally like, and then you can just change it later on. Just pick it near the beginning of your track so you find one that you like. And then I have one here specifically for effects. It's a reverb that actually goes through a delay, and so it's a really interesting sort of combo that I find myself using a lot, or I'll do the other way around and just switch them. But if you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.